Welcome, everybody, to the Scale Up Show. This is your host, Ryan Staley, and I have a very special guest with me back today. I have Greg Galant, who is the founder and CEO of Muckrack. Bootstrapped his company from 0 to 200 employees before they took some growth equity round. You missed part one. We talk about AI integrating with PR, some really cool things that the platform is leveraging on, or I should say that his platform is leveraging with AI and PR, as well as how to use that to gather one of the most vital resources right now as it comes to revenue growth, and that is attention. Greg, welcome. Happy to have you back on the show, man.
Great. Thanks for having me back, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm excited, and we're gonna go through a couple things here. I want to go through your use cases, your company use cases, specifically with AI tools, right? So more on the human side. But before we do that, one of the things that I mentioned in your initial bio in episode 1, which if you missed episode 1, go back, listen to it. Some really cool things he talks about. He's got some gold in there, specifically on how to actuate using PR with AI, but was specifically about how you started a podcast in 2005, right? And I don't want to steal your thunder. You had some guests that would probably be pretty untouchable or very difficult to get to now. So walk us through that. And like, what was your thought process of getting invested into technology before it was totally figured out? Because it's hyper relevant to what's happening right now with AI.
Sure. Yeah. I've been on the bleeding edge of a bunch of different turns. I started my first business when I was 14, building websites for companies. And I was back in the mid 90s when the idea of having a website was a new thing. Then as I was graduating college in '05, I actually was working part-time at CNN.com in Atlanta, and I kept getting stuck in traffic. The iPod had just come out. So it occurred to me like, oh, it'd be cool if I could like download audio from CNN and stick it on my iPod and listen to it in the car. And, I was looking into it. I saw there was this new concept called RSS feeds with enclosures. Really sexy name. And the idea was basically you could automatically push out MP3s to people through these RSS feeds. And then the term was just starting to get coined podcast because you'd listen to it on your iPod. A lot of people didn't want to use the term podcasting for a while because everyone assumed Steve Jobs was going to have Apple sue everyone out of existence who used the term. But we all know that turned out okay. So I wanted to just try starting a podcast. I just graduated school. I was always curious about how entrepreneurs got started. And now there's a lot of media about that. But back in '05, there was very little. This was pre-blogs for the most part. So I figured, almost pre-YouTube. YouTube was just getting started then. So I'm like, let me just interview entrepreneurs about how they started their business. And, it's one of the first, probably the first or one of the first podcasts to do that. I got, in retrospect, an amazing lineup of guests. I had Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, on. I did the podcast at his office when they had less than 50 employees.
Nice.
I had the founder of Yelp, the founder of Vanguard Group, John Bogle, who pretty much invented the idea of the index fund, and a whole bunch of other amazing entrepreneurs. And then one of the folks I had on there was Ev Williams, who himself started a podcasting company called Odeo. Odeo didn't work out, and I watched him pivot to a side project called Twitter, which then led me to sign up for Twitter super early, get at Gregory. I got at Gregory on Twitter because I was the first Gregory to get on there. And then in the meantime, too, back then I tried starting a podcast advertising network in 2005. In retrospect, that was about 10 years too early to market, and learned some painful lessons about market timing at the time. But it was just like a wild time to kind of see that birth of podcasting and be one of the first podcasts out there.
That's so cool, man. Like, I love that. And I like how it all started. Is like, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this, right? So in light with what you're seeing with AI as relates to large language models or any other kind of areas, like, what are 3 other ideas that you have, maybe that are similar-ish, that you think are opportunities or could be really cool leading edge things like you're talking about, like when you started that podcast back?
You mean ideas in general or related to
let's just say related to AI, right? Like, because like it's unlocking so many new doors. I know I didn't prep you on this, so I apologize, but a lot of times
Yeah, that's great.
they,
Well, see if human
they just,
intelligence still works on my
yeah,
end.
right. So it's like, so yeah, man, like, what are you thinking? Like, what would be cool? Like, what are some ideas that are like the podcast ideas that you had, like, in 2005 that come to your mind now in 2024 with AI specifically with everything that you're seeing?
I just think there's so much opportunity now. It like reminds me when websites first came about, and then it feels very familiar to like when social media first came about, because there was a while there around when we were getting started, it was like you could kind of have a wafer thin idea, but if it involved social media, you could get a lot of traction because it was so new and nobody understood it, or most executives didn't understand social media for the first probably 5 to 10 years of its existence. I think we're there with AI now, where for anyone who doesn't yet have a business, or students out there who don't yet have anything to call on, if you could just understand AI, it's super powerful. And I'm still shocked at how many people just haven't set up a ChatGPT account and tried, asking ChatGPT a question, or played with Perplexity or Claude, or just ignore the Google Gemini results. So there's just so much opportunity now for anyone who wants to break into the business world. I mean, I think a really fun thing I saw recently. Have you played with Notebook LM yet? Google's
Yeah, I did,
new
man.
beta?
I've had alpha access to that for about, it's funny, probably about like 8 months, it seems
Amazing.
like. And it just started to take off once that voice option, the podcast option came available.
Yeah.
But go ahead, man. I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
Well, yeah, I was gonna go with that. Like, I mean, if I had nothing to do, I think I would just like start making lots of podcasts using or for anyone who's listening, Google has this Notebook LM beta, and you can just upload any document, a PDF, a website, a book, and it makes this 15 to 20 minute podcast where it's two people talking to each other, not too dissimilar to us right now. And you really wouldn't, I mean, it passes the Turing test in a big way. It's like hard to know they're not humans, or maybe it shows you just how formulaic, a lot of like kind of the NPR style podcasts have gotten. But I think I would just sit around making lots of podcasts and then turn them into actual podcasts on iTunes and Spotify and see if any of them catch on, because you've just taken the cost of production to nothing. And you could start making podcasts about topics that are too niche for a human, like Ryan. I know this show is, it's not just your time recording it. You had to get me on the podcast. You're gonna have to edit
Hmm.
it. You're gonna have to promote it. But if the whole thing were automated, with maybe some quality control, you could make a really niche podcast, like what the best pizza places to go to in New York City, or I don't know, something very particular. I don't know exactly what the hit would be there, and these might all be awful ideas, but this would be the kind of stuff where if I were in my early 20s again and didn't have a leg to stand on, I'd be playing around with all these new AI tools and figuring like, how can I make interesting media? Where can we find good business applications? And how can we how
Yeah.
can we kind of take this thing everybody knows is so powerful, but doesn't know exactly how to use, and show people like good use cases?
That's cool, man. That's actually what I do. So that's a big part of my job right now is like, and here's what I would tell you. Here's the pluses and the minuses. Pluses are, it's really cool because like I get to experiment across all different models, and I get to like have that kid like curiosity. I pointed it at like revenue growth. So like that's been the focus area. It's pretty eye opening. So that's the exciting part, right? Like I get to experiment, I get to do what you're saying. The part that's tough is this stuff is happening so fast, even for me, where this is like a big part of my job in showing companies how to use this. Sometimes it gets tiring trying to keep up with everything, man. Like to keep pace, right? And that's what I would say. And I don't know if that's a downside. It keeps it exciting, but sometimes it wears you out a little bit. That's all I would say, right? But love that example. So go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I know exactly what you mean. It's like everything changes so fast. And it's something as a company where we used to do kind of year-long roadmap planning. And now we're kind of reevaluating the roadmap every couple of months, because we're like, look at all the new tools that are out there that we could be leveraging for our customers to help them be more efficient. And there's stuff out
Yeah.
now that wasn't there a few weeks ago. So I'm like, we got to keep reevaluating what's possible. So it's a really exciting time, but Ryan, I think as you say, it's kind of dizzying if you're trying to make sense of the world and keep up with it all.
Well, let me ask you, so what's your frequency now? Do you do monthly or bi-monthly, or like for roadmap about, and you're talking product road mapping, right? Or are you talking whole company roadmap?
Yeah, more product road mapping. So it's kind of like every quarter we evaluate, but every day we're like looking at like, hey, what's out there? Can it change, our plans for how we implement things? What are more efficient ways we could do things, and make sure that we're using the latest and greatest.
Well, that's good, man. You're ahead of a lot of folks, because a lot of folks are looking at it like, I don't know, semi-annually, right? Or even if that. So I think it's really smart that you're taking that approach. So how do you personally, as a CEO of a bootstrap company, leverage AI in what you do? And like, what are a couple of your favorite use cases for you? Let's say
Yeah,
you,
I've
and
really,
then we'll go to your team next, right? So what about you?
yeah, I really had a lot of fun playing around with it. I'm a big believer that if you want to understand a new technology, you just have to personally use it. I found it to be very powerful. A lot of times I'll, like if I'm done with the meeting and I need to get my notes together on it, I'll just walk around and talk into the ChatGPT app and say what happened in the meeting. And then it'll turn that into a transcription. And then I'll ask it to turn that transcription into bulleted notes. Then when I'm back on my computer, I'll take that and edit it down and make sure that it's all correct before sharing with my team. But that's been one great way to get it out. And then I found just kind of odd and ends use cases for it too. Like the other day, I had a light bulb burn out, and it was like one of those weird shaped light bulbs. So in the old days, I'd have to go to the hardware store and say, hey, what is this? Have them find me a new one. Instead, I just took a photo of it with the ChatGPT app. It told me what kind of light bulb it was, and then I told it to send me the URL of a place I can go and buy it, and I did that. So I'm just finding all
Uh,
these weird edge cases where like I run into something, and instead of being like, oh, let me track down an expert on this thing, it's like, let me just try asking ChatGPT. And then there are other times too where maybe I could have found it on the web, but it would have taken me 20 minutes of research, and instead I can get the answer very quickly.
Love that. Yeah, that's simple. It's like similar to like my wife, she's like, yeah, I'm trying to figure out, I don't know what to make for dinner. Like she does like a dinner plan and everything like that. And I'm like, just ask it, but give it specific. Ask ChatGPT, give it specifics, telling like what your like carbs and fat and like how many people and the time you have to make it and all that, and say, you wanted chicken and vegetables or whatever. And she did that, and she's like, oh, this is pretty good. You know what I mean? Or like what you're saying with the light bulb, you take a picture of like all the ingredients in the fridge. I think you say, identify 3 things I could make with this, right? For a family of 5 or 4, or whatever you have, right? So those are pretty cool. Love those use cases. What about like for your team? Like how's your team leveraging it, and what use cases have you been blown away that your team's leveraging?
Yeah, we've been seeing our team use it a lot too, and we try to encourage it. One thing we try to encourage people to share when they've done useful things with it, and celebrate when people are experimenting with new technology. We've seen a lot of people use it to punch up writing, where maybe they write what would have been a long memo and they use it to shorten it, and they find out like, hey, you can make the memo a lot more concise without losing any of it. And it's the kind of thing where you would have otherwise had to do a few rounds of edits, and they're able to use AI to do that right away. A lot of our programmers are now using GitHub Copilot, and in many cases have become like 20-30% more efficient, because they can get the AI to do the more tedious parts of programming, like documenting code and writing tests and pieces like that. So we're seeing just all across the org, there's a lot of ways that people can use it. And I think a lot of it's about kind of creating a culture that celebrates using AI, but in a responsible way, where they understand it enough that they're not going to, leak out data that they shouldn't, et cetera, versus having an organization where it's closed off or, only top down in terms of how you tell people to use it.
That's so critical. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because many people miss that, and they from a CEO or executive perspective, they don't promote it and they don't encourage it. So then people just keep their innovation hidden behind doors, right? And they don't share it with everyone because they're afraid that their boss is going to say, okay, that's cool. Now work like 10 hours more a week, right? Like now that you could do that. So that's, I think, one of the things which is interesting that people are afraid of. Or this is also what I'm hearing is top performers don't want to give away their secret sauce of why they're a top performer. And so like, that's one of the other areas. So strong distinctions there. One last question before we wrap things up, because I know we're up on time. What would you say is like, what would you say now that you're in this space, you're heavily focused on AI, what would you say is your biggest challenge to growing the company right now from a revenue perspective? Like, what are you running into as like the single biggest barrier? Because I always like to ask this question because it helps other folks know that they're not alone sometimes with these challenges.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think one interesting thing we've seen is that just kind of pushing people to make change in how they work. And I don't know if anyone's read the adoption cycle by I think it was Gordon Jeffrey Moore, where basically the idea is that like, hey, first you get like the kind of early innovators who just love playing with new stuff, like me, who played with podcasts in '05. Then you get kind of the early majority, then the late majority. And like the early majority is a bit more like they're not going to play with the very, they're not out there just to try new technology for new technology's sake, but they want to adopt something really quickly. But then the late majority is a lot more conservative. They don't like change, and you really have to push to get them. So what I see now is that at the scale we're at, it's like we've gotten the early adopters and the people who like to be on the bleeding edge of tech. And now it's about getting the companies that are kind of more entrenched in the way they're doing things, and often for good reason. I mean, their businesses are working, they don't want to rock the boat, but getting those more slower to adopt new technology users and making them realize it's time to make the switch. And it just takes a little more hand-holding with that. And what we'll see a lot of times that we have someone where maybe they started their career with us 10 years ago. I mean, like, we might have been the first PR software they used at their first job somewhere. And then they're now like 3 jobs in and they finally landed a company and now they're at like a VP level and they bring us in because they know they love our software and they want it there. But it's that kind of waiting for companies to be ready is always hard for impatient entrepreneurs like myself. And it's just a matter of making sure that you push hard to grow and get people to come over, but also that you play the long game so you can reap those rewards of being at it.
Greg, great points. I think that's awesome to end on. Where can people find you? Where can they find more about Muckrack? And then we'll wrap things up from there, man.
Yeah, Muckrack, just muckrack.com, or that name on any social media platform will get to us. And then it's easy for me. I'm just @Gregory on Twitter and Instagram, or you can just search for my name on LinkedIn.
Excellent, man. Well, thanks for being on. This was a lot of fun, this episode as well. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you all on the next episode.